Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Smiley's Garden, and you're here for the organic takeover. Tonight, I get the opportunity to talk with Matt Powers, and a lot of you guys know Matt. He's been on a couple of the shows, and just gonna kind of tell you guys a little bit about Matt, just things that I didn't know actually. So I'm just gonna read this off actually from his book. So Matt is an author, an educator. He's a seed saver, a gardener, and an entrepreneur focused on radically transforming the entire K through 12 educational system through the collegiate system, as well as the economy, such as that it aligns with the regenerative science, natural principles, and permaculture ethics. So, um, Matt's a former public high school teacher and has a master's degree in education. And he's the author of the first government accredited permaculture curriculum in North America, which is pretty dang cool. So that's why I wanted to get that in there, Matt, because that's pretty awesome, man. That's cool stuff. So thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
Yeah. But so yeah, man, I don't know if everybody knows what I'm talking about, but this is a regenerative soil book. So Matt authored this, and I've been following you for a while because I feel like I've, as far as my gardening trajectory, it's in the same kind of path or thought mind, mindset towards it, I guess, thought process. And I've been following a lot of the same people you have in the book and you talk about, and it's really interesting because I feel like you're just down the path a little further than me on this, and it's like you know what I mean. So when I hear you talk, it's like, oh man, like these are things I've been wondering about and stuff too. So it's been really cool. Like I guess I'm a big fan, is what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like a lot of this stuff is like logical. And we're here because it makes sense. And given the options, it's like we've all kind of had to like weed through like a lot of bad options and a lot of like half truths and a lot of you know partial partial insights, and so I think that we're all looking for something that connects the why between all the things that are working and the context that they're working, because we have people who are experts, no doubt, and they're doing good things, no doubt, but for them to be like, no, 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 only my method works, don't do them, everything will die. And you go to those people and they've got good gardens too.
Yeah.
And so there has to be like, we all are like, okay, well, there has to be more to this. And that's really what led me down this path of like, well, what are they doing then? Like, how is it actually working? If it's just can't work, And so I just started asking questions I think that all of us would ask. And I just happened to be kind of like in the room, and so to speak. So I was like writing these books, curriculum for kids essentially. But I was talking to people who were like graduate school, like, professors and all these different things, and trying to bring it down to that pragmatic, like generalized, really, just to that general level. And it was fascinating because I would kept asking questions and being like, and they're like, yeah, that's not really true. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And it just was like Pandora's box every time I like touched that space, like soil, right? Or like compost, and it's like, okay, I mean, I can trust you, but clearly there's something else going on. And so I just started trying to find the common, like the basement, like where a common denominator, right? Like where can we get down to a language or a level of understanding that all these things connect? And obviously the testing world has its own like caveats and like, all that kind of stuff. But chemistry, the reason they went with chemistry is because they actually could communicate and do metrics and math with it. And there's like all these problems with that, no doubt, no doubt. But we now are at the point where we're dealing with electrochemistry and biochemistry, functionally dealing with it. So we can't like get rid of the chemistry formulas, the actual molecular structures for things, the names for them, because they're real and they do serve function. But giving plants purified minerals is always going to be shocking. I mean, if we think about, adding naked biochar to like a well-balanced, well-developed soil, it's shocking. Why? Because it's a purified element. It's a processed, purified element. And so it's like, I need to bond with something. And then it just like tears your humus apart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's very similar with those purified chemicals. I mean, think about organic compounds: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And then you put this like purified nitrogen into the soil, and they're like, well, it destroys the organic matter and the humic substances. We just figured it out. And it's like, well, if it's a purified system going to a system that there's like only impurity, then it would like go into that system.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you know what I
that
mean? And
kind
it
of,
would,
I like
yeah,
to
it would try
put
to
it in
create
the
an
book where you were,
equilibrium.
I was going to say, I like the way you put it in the book where you were saying that every input has an agenda. You know what I mean? Like every kind of mineral or everything you put in there has its kind of an agenda. And that's where that relaying it back to a balance. But it's kind of what you were getting at there is like, if you're putting in a pure element, it's got an agenda in the soil, whether it's pure carbon or pure nitrogen or pure phosphorus. Those things are gonna bond with what they are, and that's actually in the book. You have awesome resources. Thank you for these too, by the way. But it's definitely something that you can flip back to, and you have the Mulder's chart right there. And then what you're talking about is exactly that on the Mulder's chart, where you're getting these raw elements in balance, and it's got its agenda. It's doing its thing. So very cool, man.
And what's so wild is we have like a lot of us, or at least I did, had this like notion that, well, biology, they're the ones with the tent, right? They're the ones that are like, oh, I need to reproduce, I need to go get this, and I need to, they're active. But then the molecular, the atomic structure, right, of the minerals have proclivities and probabilities. And so they are actors. They have effect. And if things happen, they're moving. You know what I mean? And so it's really wild to and I say agenda and like that, like, maybe cause people like a certain knee-jerk reaction, but it allows us to categorize them as actors. I think is a good way to think about it, despite them not having intent. Right. They don't have personalities or any of the consciousness or anything like that. But if they just have those extra electrons in their outer ring, it's like they are going to do something. And so yeah, I really, for me, for my understanding, I got to bring it down to, as much as possible, down to a metaphor. Like that's why the engine, like the different components of an engine, like played into the mineral understanding for me.
No, I like that, and the metaphor too with the soil being the hardware, and I forget how you put that in there. I'd have to look. I'll let you explain that one. The
Well, what was wild, the reason that happened was I discovered as I went down to the chemistry, and I was like, well, let's see what these sand, clay, and silt particles actually are, because we just talk about them all the time. And I'm like, silicon, silicon, silicon. You guys are all silicates. And obviously, there's crazy, weird geological things, you know what I mean? All over the earth, there are veins of pure gold, right? So there are extremes, but we're talking about the general, talking about the averages, and I'm like looking at this and going, yeah, those are the silicon microchips, Silicon Valley, right? So if it's all silicates and they're conducting energy, and information, we're like doing the soil in a box, and that's our computer, and then that means that the whole system of the earth is like a computer.
Like,
And that realization for me was like, okay, well then what would the other pieces be if that's the computer? And I was like, well, it's not quite the computer, Matt. And I was like, it's kind of like the hardware. It's like the microchip. And it's like the energy is coming from the sun. And I was like, okay. And then when I learned from Olivia Housson, because this was at first that I realized this, when I was doing those opening sections. And then when I talked to Dr. Housson, and you get this whole download of organic matter, the battery.
yeah,
I was like, oh wow, it's the battery, and not only that, it's the OS, it's the operating system, because I can tweak my organic matter to be more fungal, and that plays a program for perennials and trees. And then I can program my organic matter, my compost, to be more bacterial and actinobacterial, right? And then that's like the non-mycorrhizal, like the beets, the chard. So I realized in that moment that we are in a situation with a natural computer system. And people talk about like the inherent like wisdom of the earth. It's like the earth stores information and is constantly communicating information among all its parts. That's straight up the internet. And like that's the way knowledge grows and complexes in our systems. So like how ancient and like baked in is what we're doing with computers, with the World Wide Web, all these kinds of things. You know what I mean? It's really cool, and that's why I bring it down to those metaphors or bring them to relatable spaces, because we suddenly like realize like, oh, this explains everything. The microbes are the actual users of the organic matter, and the facilitators of that energy being properly encoded and used in the economy, the the system inside that soil. And so it's like it's our soil minerals are kind of like you get what you get. You can't like dig 10 feet deep and a mile wide and remove that soil and bring in new soil. So it's kind of like in the 90s where you just got that box and you could like put in the extra RAM like your biochar and your rock dust, but like that's your computer, you know what I mean? You'd have to move to another site to upgrade to really get a different computer. And so it's the program that you install on it. You could be doing Linux or Apple or Mac, and they totally have different proclivities, right? And especially you go back in time, right? You're looking at like 2001, like those things are very divergent. They all became like more similar over time as they all poached from each other. But this idea that we went in and they're the microbes are the users of the system, and we tried with our giant fingers to like touch these tiny little keyboards, and we're like smash smash smash, we got the coding wrong, and it's like all messed up, right? It's like Linux, and we melted the computer down. And it's like, well, you fired your computer staff, and it's like you're the CEO that doesn't know how to code, trying to set up the new computer systems. And we got to bring in the specialized teams. We got to have an IT team, right, to handle these kinds of things. It's because we really are limited in this space. We can assist them. We can bring in the resources that feed their genius, right? but we can't if we're just not like that. It's like, well, I'm not a genius with code and math. So that's not going to just come to me at like, here I am a CEO at like, 60, I'm 60 years old. You know what I mean? Like those things aren't going to come to that person. We have to go to the people that actually can do that. Coders, they're usually young. And so it's like, just like that specialization, these microbes. And there are certain circumstances where we can do things to hop in. But as I hypothesize in my new course, a lot of the things that we think are one thing may be another. Like cobalt, they're like, well, when you add cobalt, you actually make all the other minerals more available. How amazing is that? And it's like, yeah, but cobalt's the centerpiece of B12, which makes it a biological vitamin. You know, B vitamins and biological vitamins. So in other words, you're actually stimulating the biological functioning, the metabolism of the soil microbes. And we all know the soil microbes are the greatest solubilizers of nutrients. So them becoming more bioavailable may actually not be cobalt directly, but indirectly through the microbes. And there's a lot of that. When we look at the Mulder's chart, I was talking to one of Dr. Lane Ingham's star consultants about this. And I said, you know, I think that, I mean, there's synergies that go beyond one-to-one relationships. There's like triangling, right? You know what I mean? And there's layers. And I actually think that there's triangling and thresholds. Just like with like the EH pH charts, you know how there's like they're not straight across and stuff. I think that at certain thresholds and concentrations, the triangling like flips and switches and leans different ways, and there's definitely some more complexity there that we haven't mapped yet.
No, I agree. And I've always kind of been like against that thought that, oh, we got it all figured out. We know this, we know A plus B and whatever. We got all these calculations and it's all figured out. We got it all handled. Because it seems like, at that moment is when you stop figuring it out, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, all we figured out is that we don't know what we've known. That's the extent of what we figured out, is how much we don't know. Really is a lot of it.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
especially,
mean, yeah, keep going.
oh, I was going to say, especially like, with the recent, you did cover the rhizophagy cycle. So I was kind of transitioning through, but the part of that really changed my perspective is like, I know in the book too, you talk about John Kemp's talk on microbial metabolites. And I thought that was a really interesting portion of the book where you describe salts versus these microbial metabolites, and I forget what you put it as, but do you know what I'm talking about in the section there of the book?
Yeah. So salts not salts.
Yeah. And then you relate it to how taking it up through biology is a lot different than just adding raw mineral.
Yeah, I'm actually filming this actually right now in the course. So salts in chemistry means something different than our table salt at our at our dinner tables and in our restaurants. It could mean that, but it also refers to any cation and an anion that balance each other out and create a neutral solid. So they're a neutral solid that you can solubilize with water. So it's this ultimate delivery package, right, to the chemist. and these salts, a lot of them literally had chlorine as the pair. So sodium, sodium chlorine, like they go together and make NaCl, which is our table salt, but they were pairing other things with chlorine. And chlorine is a micronutrient, but as a micronutrient, it's very easily, if it's in abundance, it's a toxin. So the salt thing is more complicated. I was told by Elaine that they're like salting the earth. Jeff Lawton also said this, that they're salting the earth. And so I'm thinking table salt. And then later I learned, like, I believe it's like gypsum that they were using to salt the earth in Roman times. And this idea of salting the earth, maybe more that we're like shocking it. I mean, yes, you can get salt and do these things and it's terrible and it's damaging, and the salinity level goes up. And salinity is a huge problem globally. We lose tons of hectares a year, and even daily and hourly, to salinity. But this complicates things, and this is the reason why I think that there's a lot of like confusion, because there's vocabulary terms like salt that are being interpreted as like table salt, you know what I mean? Salting the earth kind of stuff. And then the chemistry and the agronomists are like, oh dear, can't even. And on one level, it's like that's understandable that they would have that reaction given their perspective scientifically. And the reality is that those forms of the nutrients, they're not ideal because they're purified and they're also not passing through the digestion of a microbe. And this is why often people are adding their nutrition to a microbial ferment. Like in Latin America right now, they're creating these and this is a colloquial term, biofertilizer. This is a fermentation vat, essentially. And they're letting these microbes proliferate and basically consume and digest and change the form into a very reduced, because it's a ferment, so it's a very reduced, highly energetic forms of all these nutrients. So they're putting their like mineral fertilizers in with microbes, capping it, letting them break it down, and then what they're taking out is microbially digested and available. So this is what they're doing. This is why Elaine is putting kelp and fish emulsion into her compost teas as well. So the microbes, there's a variety of things that are going on. There's the traditional Elaine and gum soil food web thing going on, where the sugars, the cakes and cookies are coming out of the roots. It's actually more complicated than that. Monosaccharides, simple sugars, bring the bad microbes. And the polysaccharides, which, I mean, if you think of your mycomedicinal book from Paul Stamets, the polysaccharides are the medicinal compounds. They're calling in the good microbes. So it's not just cakes and cookies. They're also releasing organic acids and other things, and proteins even. So there's a lot going on. And so they're releasing stuff. The microbes are releasing stuff, and then they begin a conversation. Exudation is not initially specific, and it also goes on a gradient. As the root hairs age, they change in EH. So that's why like every root hair draws in different microbes, and it's because it's aging. That's just the way it is. So and we have to also remember that exudation can be seen more as excretion too, because they've got to dump these sugars somewhere. Just like they're venting O2, they're releasing protons because they need to stay in balance. Remember, they've got to stay in balance. And so these plants are doing this. They're releasing this mucilage. They're releasing these exudates because that's how they function.
Right.
And so if they're healthy, they're doing good exudation. If they're unhealthy, they're releasing bad exudation. And in fact, if they're unhealthy and stressed, they're releasing OH negative, which is harming the soil. So they're releasing these sugars and other things too. And the microbes are coming. They're starting a conversation, and they're giving them food in ideal forms only in certain situations. So they've been communicating, right? They're communicating, and so the plant's like, okay, I'm gonna double down on feeding you. I know who you are. I know what you want, because they signal what they want, and it looks like the microbes are like signaling and and getting what they want. You know what I mean? But it's really like a conversation. And what goes on is actually those microbes, unless they're part of the rhizophagy cycle and small enough to be taken in through the meristem cells of the root tip of the root, the growing root, they're going to be promoted in place. And we need to wait for predators to come and release them. And so bacteria have been called the black box because they're going to just reproduce. They're not going to like poop, you know what I mean? And so they're going to just reproduce with their excess. You know, they keep making more of themselves. So you need predators. Elaine now calls, groups them differently and calls them protists. But it's the micro and macro arthropods are shredding everything up, allowing the bacteria and the fungi to get in there and feed on everything, and then the sugars are feeding on the sugars as well. But it's the protozoa and the nematodes, protists, that are going in and actually consuming them, and it's their waste, their manure, their microbiological manure is actually the food. So, and then you think about the manure of an animal, it's like that's microbiologically digested too.
Yep.
And so we're all on the same train. They are the digestion of this of nutrition and the release of it in the soil is exactly what's happening in our guts. The microbes are feeding on our foods, and it's the microbial release or waste. But it's not waste, it's our food, it's gift. Flipping our paradigm, right? We are fed by the microbes the same exact way, except our soil biome is internal and not external. And so bacteria and fungi, it's all external. Their digestion's external, so they release acids, digestive acids. They're just digestive juices, right? I mean, when we think about, fungi releasing, phosphatase and breaking down like phosphate, creating phosphates that can be uptaken by plants. They're creating essentially like a pool because they're releasing this digestive enzyme and it's breaking it down. And there's actually bacteria all hovered around it, just like on the savannah and the lion killing everything. I actually asked Mike Amaranthus about this, and that's he said absolutely, that's what I see. They're hugging there at the edges, and this is 40 years of experience with mycorrhizal fungi. So they prefer this because it's in forms that they can digest, very fine forms at the rates that they digest it. It's passing through all these different filters. Obviously, it depends on the situation which filters, but let's first now go back to the rhizophagy. So if you can pass through the the meristem of the root tip of a root, then you're not going to be out there being released primarily by the nematodes of the protozoa or anything like that. You get sucked up into the root. And then I'll reveal something that is brand new, brand new, that I haven't even published in my podcast because I haven't edited the video. We go on forever, James White and I. But he has an incredible presentation in the middle of our giant conversation when we finally got around to it. So rhizophagy, the microbes that survive versus the microbes that are destroyed have a very distinct difference. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah.
The ones that survive create nitric oxide to counteract the superoxidase.
Okay.
So when they're bombarded with superoxidase, the ones that can't create nitric oxide die. The ones that do can persist and then promote themselves. Because the nitric oxide, when it's released, creates nitrate, which is why these microbes are allowing the root hairs to grow. Huh. So without microbes, and they've proven this, and this will sound like an audacious claim, plants without microbes do not grow root hairs.
That's wild.
If you don't have microbes, you don't get root hairs.
So does that, now that you brought up roots, I'm just going to say, like, a lot of people will notice water roots versus soil roots. That's kind of a common, I know they're not scientific or whatever, but those are the common kind of terms there. So if I took a clone and I have it in some aero cloner or an aqua type cloner, it grows water roots versus one that I put in a soil or a root riot and it's going to grow soil roots. Is that what a difference might be? Is are we not using is the bacteria not able to do that in the water like environment? Is that, or am I misinterpreting what you're saying there?
No, definitely they could do it in a water situation. This is a primary feature. So before mycorrhizal fungi's relationships formed, rhizophagy was first. So feeding on very simple, small microbes that can come in aqueous states, right? I mean, this is what this is the actual benefit of composting. Like, this is the actual benefit that Elaine didn't know. And bless her, she was on the right path, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she's right about so many things. So, and she's my soil mentor, and I'm an affiliate of hers even, and I have nothing but love. But this is like something that she missed, and it's so cool that, like, despite like not seeing, because they're invisible. I mean, the mycologists love their stains, and that's why a mycologist found this. But Elaine's always doing clear slides, and so she couldn't see the invisible. But she was still spot on. Right? Everyone's like, I don't know, Elaine, you're not growing mycorrhizal fungi with that setup you got going there. And meanwhile, she's like, I don't know, it works really well though. It's because they're going right into the root, and then the plant's like, okay, bombard you with superoxidase. And the microbes initially release ethylene, stress hormone, which causes it to go into a immunological response. So it makes the plants immunologically alert, number one. And then all that kelp and the fish emulsion she added, which has every micronutrient and trace nutrient, gets sucked up directly into the roots and then bombarded and released.
I know, it's a trip, man.
And then and you know, it's like all soils need is compost. It's almost like, well, all soils need like preloaded microbes with with all the nutrients already in them to be delivered straight to the plants, so the plants can then photosynthesize at their peak and release the exudates to promote those microbes, to keep them going and create the most stable forms of soil organic matter. Because adding compost does not add the same amount of soil organic matter per year as just plants do. So this is the real advantage. And often I think we're attributing the soil organic matter to the compost addition, when in fact it's the microbes from that compost going into the plant and then triggering the plant to do these things. And we've got them confused because we're just taking one gestalt metric. Know what we're saying?
No, yeah, no, I dig it, man. I've just, the one thing I'm curious about with the whole rhizophagy, do we know, or do we have an idea what type of bacteria or what class these are in, or is there a way we can try to add more possibly?
Yeah. And that, yeah, so there are all those endophytes that I talk about in here in the book.
No,
they're
so
Bacillus, Saccharomyces, which is funny. It's beer yeast, right?
Yeah.
That's in all the plants already. You know, it's crazy to think about. Bucholderia.
Yeah.
Like there's a few all-stars that I know, but I also know that we're just still at the beginning. So we need to PCRID these guys.
Yeah.
And it's some of these things are going to be easy, like the yeast, but some of them are going to be more like AMF, where they're borrowing nucleic information from multiple people and creating a library to choose from. And so we're like, who is this really? We see the abilities, you know what I mean? And the abilities can kind of like tell us who they are, because there's those genetic traits, right? But I think that we're still. I mean, I've got a list, right?
Yeah.
But those microbes are primarily microbes we were studying for other things, and we discovered what they do. And so it's not like that was intentional.
Gotcha.
So like Bacillus megaterium, it's mega big. And so it was the standard model microorganism for a long time in the lab setting. And so that's why we know stuff about it. But that doesn't mean like that's like the main character, right? And so there's like and yes, the proclivity and the commonality, the fact that like trichoderma shows up and like and E. coli shows up and all these different things that like they're the ones that show up the most in like in a petri dish, you know, or in the soil or anything sampled. And so it is true that they are there, that they are ubiquitous and all that stuff, but it's kind of like almost everything is ubiquitous if the foods are there, right? And that is true and not true, right? Because it's like, well, if my soil doesn't have the nitrogen fixing microbes, then I can't fix nitrogen, right? So that is true too. So yeah, I mean, we need to know who these microbes are, and that's why it's great that there's these new PCR tests that are looking at not just the microbes, but their ratios, their amounts, and their solubilization rates
Yeah.
of individual nutrients. So we're like getting there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we'll see who's really responsible for what in what proportions. So
No, that isn't it.
that's an early answer, right? Right. We're still like running through the data, and I don't know of anyone yet who started working with AI in this space. The second that someone starts working with big data and like and AI, we're gonna see some new patterns begin to emerge that are going to help us all navigate this stuff easier,
Yeah.
because it's a lot of information and there's so much testing that needs to be done.
And that is a cool section of the book too, where you list. There's a few pages where you kind of run through the different things we know. You know what I mean? Certain
Yeah.
pseudomonas, certain names, like you just said too, the bacillus species. So that's an interesting part of the book, no doubt. And I think too, just to kind of go back to the bigger picture of it all, we do know that we can create a quality compost, and we can add that, and these things happen, you know. So it's not necessarily like we're always going to be able to read how many grams of each micro was in that mix that we added, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of trust in knowing that if you make a quality compost, you're most likely getting a lot of these beneficial things happening anyway. So
Especially if your compost is properly fermented. So everyone's doing hot compost for a while, and then people got like not so enthusiastic about it, and then they got into Korean natural farming. Korean natural farming is highly reduced.
yeah.
It's very fungal too. It's like, you know, mostly yeasts. And now people who are doing hot compost are letting their pile sit 20 to 30 days. You know what I mean? Because they want it to actually do consistently the right thing.
Yeah.
And so those best practices, I feel like, are finally arriving to give us more of that consistency.
Yeah, no doubt. Do you have a favorite way of composting? Because I know you cover several of them in there too. So
Yeah. So I've done it so many different ways. Um, I'm really excited to do it a new way.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm moving to Texas, and I'm going to be doing a lot of compost down there, and I'm really excited about it. I'm going to be applying everything, you know, from the book, especially from like this biofertilizer, biostimulant perspective,
Yeah,
because that, I mean, there's like I think over 100 different species that we talk about that we've identified in specific, and we've, I mean, we look at inoculants, it's like one or two, or they say it's a big spectrum of all things, and it's like, no, 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 no. All things are like this. Like they're just like gonna be like the, you know what I mean, stuck in the doorway altogether.
yeah,
And so it's really, I'm really excited to do things more strategically. I really liked doing a combination of the hot compost with EM, because EM prevents the release of the nitrogen and the carbon, because it's like a heat governor. So suddenly I don't have to turn constantly. I don't have to worry. And I tested this. I mean, like I did this, and at first I was like, huh, it's not going to get hotter. And then it was like, oh, it's not going to get hotter. Okay. And so I was like, this is kind of amazing. And so it matures faster, you retain the more volume, you don't gas off. So, you know, like the gas emissions are all down, greenhouse gas emissions. So, and then you don't lose the nutrients, right? And then it's more reduced, and it's already inoculated with biofertilizers. So for me, it was like masterful. And that's why I have a bunch of new consortiums like EM that I'm working on and planning. And because the reality is it's like there are multiple purple non-sulfur bacteria,
right.
right? And like Rhodobacter sphaeroides, there are others, right? And so there's so much going on, and it's really, really exciting. I think that even though we're just scratching the surface, there's a lot that we can do. So basically, I love more specific microbial ferments and decomposition events. And I say ferments because, you know, the opposite of fermentation is oxidation, and I want to avoid oxidizing, which locks up things and gases things off.
Yeah,
And that's what the hot compost is. I mean, like, where does the heat come from? Right? It's burning. You know what I mean? It's like we're oxidizing wood when we're burning wood. You know what I mean? So, um, does that answer your question?
yeah. No, and you know what? It brings up another question too. Is, you know, when you mentioned it's a reducing, so let's talk a little bit. Just because it's a good way to relate EH or redox type reactions. But why is being a reducing benefit for us on there?
Okay, so number one, if it's oxidized, you're talking nitrates. Any form of nitrogen you add to anything oxidized within hours is nitrate. And that takes 4 times the water molecularly. Can't get out of it. It's a permanent mathematical truth.
Okay.
4 water molecules for every nitrate molecule. And then it takes 16% more energy just to do that. So it stresses the plants out like crazy. So avoid oxidized compost. And if you've got oxidized soil, fix that first, because anything you're going to do is going to just like stress the plant out. So we want things to be reduced because we want energy in the soil. Not too much, because, you know, you can get zapped, right. There could be eutrophic, too many you have too much nutrition, right? Like that's what's happening in our waterways. And everything is always about this like Goldilocks we always want to be in this Goldilocks state, but we are missing the energy from our soils, and that's the fundamental problem of what's going on. Carbon's part of it, but it's like we're measuring the wrong thing because there's flex. This is the most important thing for people to understand, and it's not popular, to like come out against the grand narrative, but CO2 is a metric that is not reliable, because the reality is the only place for CO2 to go is through photosynthesis. So unless we increase the photosynthetic capacity of the earth, and unless we have soils that can accept that energy to reduce the soils to bring the energy back, we won't get our soils back the way they were. And the linchpin in holding that energy is the carbon. It's the soil organic matter. They're the actual battery. So everyone's like been struggling kind of for years, and they're like, yeah, compost is like food for microbe, right? Or like, oh no, it's kind of like a natural fertilizer. And then they're like, no, compost is organic matter. You need to have your levels right. And it bounced all over the map because it does serve all those functions, but its primary function, the reason it looks like that to everyone, because it's a reservoir for energy. And because it's the reservoir for energy, it's powering the entire system of the soil. So the earth itself is missing the natural energy from the soil, which is the potential for fertility. And that's what's going on. That's like literally what's going on. And so like, let's just say, because I did say a big thing about CO2, now let's finish that. If we bring back the earth's soils and we bring back the photosynthetic capacity, we've been using fungicides and tilling and alkalinizing and oxidizing for like a minute, you know what I mean? What happens when the fungi comes back? They breathe. And so the fungi is going to exhale way more CO2. And in fact, fungi releases more CO2 14 times as much as humans do per year. And I thought we killed it all. Oh, snap. So when this happens, it's going to release a lot more CO2. But this is the mistake. The past had canopies hundreds of feet taller with primeval forests that covered the earth with rich, lush grasslands. CO2 is exhaled by the microbes and the animals. And there's this giant canopy, multi-story canopy, like imagination go wild, okay? Like, we're tiny and everything's like way too big. That was the reality. And CO2 is O2 with carbon on it. So it's heavier. So it falls. So O2 goes up and CO2 falls. This is the actual system. So the O2 from all the animals in the forest didn't leave the forest. It was absorbed by the trees in situ.
Yeah.
And so the ice core samplings that we've been taking represent actually more like bigger cycles. They represent like volcanic activity and like grand solar minimums and ice ages and stuff like that. So it's actually very hard for us from that perspective to get snapshots of what all these things were like. And so it's confused people. And they're like, we just got to get rid of CO2. And in fact, we need to increase the amount of cycling capacity. So it's not about the number. We shrunk the engine of our carbon cycle. And then we're like, oh, look, we flooded the engine. Too much CO2. Oh, really? You cut all the trees down, buddy. What do you think is going to happen? You know what I mean? There's some like fundamental like idiocy playing out here. And so like when we actually look at it, it's like, oh, we're going to increase the cycling of carbon. We're going to increase the capacity to take it in. And in the end, it's going to be a whole lot more carbon cycling, but way more efficiently, way more in situ. And we're in the end, we're going to have actually a much richer soil because they'll be reducing the energy into the soil rather than having the energy go into the sky, because that's what this all is, right? It's imbalance of energy. And we'll have that energy potential in the soils. And because we have that carbon not going up into the sky and bonding with all our O2, because there's an oxygen shortage. I'm not talking COVID. This is one of the scariest things when you go look it up, is that the earth is literally losing its oxygen. And if you live in a city and you're like, wait a second, what photosynthesizes here? You have my realization of 15 years ago. So I stopped living in cities. So I was like, oh, there's no air. We're all breathing CO2 and it's heavy and it's stagnant. And it's stacking up all around us. So understanding all this stuff like really liberated me in my understanding of the world that we live in. And the redox lens is old in chemistry, but we've only finally started to use it in ecology and soil science, and it's going to just unlock so many different things. I mean, just think about this. Reduction versus oxidation. Reduction's the gain of energy. Oxidation's the loss of energy and the gain of oxygen. Antioxidant. Our antioxidant foods are anti-energy loss foods. So you're like, oh wait, is this why they're healthy? They're full of energy.
Yeah. Like
and so suddenly, like the way I eat, the way that we all think about our foods, like all of us are connected. The plants need to be reduced into that Goldilocks range, and so does our food, so that we can get things in that optimal range as well.
Yeah, no doubt. I have a hard time, I guess, getting my head around, like, I understand redox reactions and what you're talking about, and I know I've been looking into it for a while now, and it still is just out of my grasp because of the fact that, like, when it comes to measuring pH, we can measure that and we can understand pH, but how would we know the EH of our soil? Like, have you figured, or like, how is Olivier measuring that when he's?
Well, there's two things that are going on. It is difficult to measure EH. The meters are expensive. They're platinum electrodes. And then getting a good reading, a consistent reading, is difficult. So he was using the Philip Callahan meter, and we recently talked about this, to find like a 0 point. And wherever the Philip Callahan meter would write a 0, that's where he would take his EH reading, because there was 0 interference.
Okay.
And so that's what he was doing, but he stopped doing that because it's easier to look at the plant to get an understanding, to infer what's going on. And so that's why he's working on a spectrometer. Spectrometry light, light readers.
Okay.
And meters are like the hot new thing. They can't tell you the microbiology though I mean, potentially we can create correlatives of that, but the microbe meter apparently is like way off, like an order of magnitude off, which is really important to know. So yeah, it's early days with this stuff too, but he's really really positive about pH, EC, and maybe micronutrients with the meter right now. But those are, again, are plants. So again, it's that inference. It's like the plant sap analysis. We're inferring, and because the testing is not quite there, availability wise. I mean, people are making these meters, but again, I mean, when he talks about the testing, he's like, well, it's gonna like takes all day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's doing like 20 like tests on each thing, and there's a certain amount of minutes he has to wait, and he's got all these protocols, which is important. But I just think of farmers. I'm like, farmers don't got time for that.
Right.
So it's really might be easier to actually do the inference and use the charts in my book. So if we look at the EH against our like the pH charts, the corrosion charts for a mineral, and you are looking at the pH which you've got, and you're looking at the plant sap analysis of the plant, you can be like, oh, and if you also have the soil test too, you can be like, wow, this is available, and it's not being uptaken, but I'm in this pH. It could be that my EH is out of range.
Gotcha.
There could be antagonism too, right? I mean, there even could be like other things happening where the microbes are fighting each other and like using the iron stripping and doing other things. But 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 I mean that's more like at a micro level. But there's all these things constantly happening. And with the way I see it, you know, when we look at it at the macro level, is acid and oxidized, the top left of the pH scale, that quadrant,
Yeah.
that is acidic and oxidized. So I think of you know, freshly tilled mineral acidic soils of Montana. And then, you know, you look down at the bottom right, which is often people blank on, right? Alkaline, alkaline reduced. Well, that's the salt marshes. That's why everyone blanks on that, because no one's growing there. So right. And so I actually, in my course and in some of my lectures, I put pictures underneath these things. So the bottom left, that is the aerobic, wet, high organic matter, I put the peat bog. And I could put like a forest on the first half of it, you know, and then the peat bog on the bottom half. But I just put a peat bog on there to show the extremes of each area. And then the top area, I put, you know, the sandy first establishment weed areas of the beach. And so it's alkaline and oxidized. And so those are the extremes. That's how I think of it. And then because I think of it in those extremes, it allows me to like almost characterize them in a way, make a caricature of them in my head in a way. And so I can better ID those things when I see them play out. And so, like, for instance, where it's alkaline and reduced, I'm like, okay, so it's waterlogged compacted soils, and like, you know, there could be like salts. And so I'm like, okay, oomocytes are there, and that's Phytophthora. The nurseries are all dealing with this. Oh, it's because of their chemical fertilizers and the waterlogged base layer in their pots. And then it's spreading, and so suddenly you're like seeing these things, and you're like, oh, when it dries out, that's why this is missing, and that's why the leaves are looking like that. Okay. And then, you know, oh, we waterlogged. Oh, that's why this is locked up now. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
begin to be able to kind of triangulate. I wish we could like pancake all of these holistic things together and make an animation that shows like all these things happening in real time. I don't know if I can make it not confusing. Like that's the thing, is I think that like we have to like learn things each together and then like kind of like put them together in our head and accept them as this thing, because they're in other, not dimensions per se, but they're outside of the frequencies in which we see, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or wavelengths in which we see, you know what I mean?
We can't quantify it by measuring it. I mean, we can, but it's really difficult, really expensive. One
Yeah.
question I have about that chart is when they were formulating the data and the groupings of those, was that based off what they were seeing in the field? So it was like Olivier going and taking the measurements, so he knew the pH, EH, and then they saw these disease problems, so they started to kind of correlate those, or how was that chart formed?
I think, well, he's really like into field research.
Yeah.
So, and he came to this because he had fundamental questions. And he actually used his more traditional standard research to fund the more avant-garde redox research. So he's an incredible guy because of that. But a lot of it's meta. So a lot of it's a lot of reading, like what I do. You know what I mean? He's definitely reading a ton of literature and doing an immense amount of research. And I think that's why a lot of us, I don't know, get along or respect each other despite us all coming from very different walks of life. We're all doing like trying to drink a lake or an ocean. The information is daunting, and if you're undaunted and you wade into it and can swim, there's like a mutual respect. People are like, oh, you're out here. You know, there's no islands are out here, you know. You're like, yeah, I know. It's like, okay. Yeah. You know, it's like we are literally like we are far out there.
Yeah.
And what's so cool is that it's clear that now that we're free from land and we've kind of like, you know, like Tony Robbins, we burned the boats. We're really seeing new things, and we're creating. I mean, John Kempf and Olivier have a slightly modified chart from the one in here. Let me just show you what happened. So viruses are a little bit lower, and bacteria is wider. But that's all. That's different. But you know, to the academics, those things are very important.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
So, but right, but John Kemp and him have been combining his data because he's got like tens of thousands of test results, which is incredible. And they're combining all this data to get at more precision with that so that they can map it onto the gun, so that they can shoot their plants and be like,
Wow.
okay, I need to watch out for this.
That's pretty
You
awesome.
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a totally epic tool. So that's currently what he's working on. So I think that it's going to be really great because it's a way that allows us to all have access to EH without us breaking the bank. And also that we can like trust the results.
Yeah.
Because a lot of this stuff is going into AI, right? So it's feedback looping, and so the meters are getting better and better and better because more people are using them on more subjects, more test results. So that's the hope for the future. It's already in process. It feels like a race, actually. It feels like certain people are revealing that they're making some, and some of them are not.
So this is a thing that a lot of people are on. I mean, it's not because I don't know. I mean, it seems kind of crazy and futuristic stuff, or whatever. But I mean, other people are studying the usefulness of this too, right? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, man. You're good. Catch your breath. But that's what I've always kind of wondered about it is like, yeah, we can get an expensive tool, we can measure it, study it, but I mean, Olivia isn't the only person kind of thinking on ways that this information could be used, I would imagine. So, wrong pipe there.
Yeah. What you said made me like started laughing. Yeah, it's like everyone is thinking the same lines.
Yeah.
We all kind of see the same future, which makes it inevitable. And so we're very shortly going to arrive at a place where this kind of book, and I'm working on the second edition as like adding little details like that. but it's basically complete, and which is really crazy. But it's really about getting this information more fluent, because I mean the fact that I am the first person to create visual cycles for every nutrient
That is
seemed crazy to me. And in fact, I didn't believe that that was true for a long time. So I spent 3 months creating these because they didn't exist. And I spent months looking for them
yeah.
and collecting parts of them, because I kept finding ones with other parts. And I'm like, well, who's true? And then I would find another one where it didn't even include the things I just was looking at. And I'm like, okay, what's real? And so I had to go down to the actual studies, and then like every like exchange, and like this has got percentages in it, which is kind of cool. But I don't have that for every single one yet. But it's really, I think, important to visualize these things, because the way Steve Jobs always put it was that if you could actually imagine the whole picture, like the big picture in detail, you actually understand it. Like that's actual intelligence. And so for me, like we're going back to the beginning, working with Dr. Lane Ingham one-on-one years ago, I was like, you know what? I don't get this. I didn't do well, in science in high school, Elaine. You got to help me. And Elaine, like I got her to explain it in a way that I finally understood. And this was 8 years ago. And it gave me confidence like nothing else. And I was like, okay, if I can bring it down to my hands, to the soil and the plants and the actions, and you can tell me why, then I think we're going to be good. And as soon as I could do, and Elaine's such a good teacher that she can do that. Yeah. Most people can't do that. But Elaine is such a good teacher. And there's a secret behind this. Elaine's dad was a University of Minnesota professor, and he had her doing plate counts at age 6 in the laboratory, university lab. So she's been looking at these things when it was imagination land to her. When she would go to sleep at night and then the microbes would dance around and talk, and like, this is why she can write comic books around the microbes. So she was able to bring it down for me to this level that made it knowable. And then even to today, I ask her questions. Like I you know what I mean? I'm an affiliate, and I got into one of her early classes, like as part of that program and everything. But I've learned everything I've learned one-on-one with her by just like asking. Yeah. And her telling me, and us Skyping or writing each other, or me editing, or formatting her books. I've helped her with that. And so I've been able to ask her like fundamental like questions that are like vulnerable questions. Like the most important thing to me in like mentorship relationships is that I get to ask vulnerable questions, like stupid questions. Because it's the stupid questions that actually get these like very interesting responses. We're like, oh no, it's nothing like that. Because the context is like this. And I'm like, okay, you just seeded the idea properly. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So when we ask stupid questions, to me, we get these like much more precise or maybe even incisive, because it like cuts right to it, right? So I always like kind of like, and then that's why like you look at my podcast and like it's clip, 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 because I cut my questions out almost half the time because I feel like, you know, I sound like an idiot, but I get these great answers from them because of that. And so I just have done things in a way to bring it down to my level of comprehension. And and they're just techniques. I mean, like my intelligence has hasn't changed, you know, in this whole time. I've just figured out how to like use little tools to bring it all this information down to a level that I can manage. And I would, you know, like I love this stuff. I get really addicted to difficult texts. I usually read things like 3 to 5 times because like I said, like I wasn't good at the science, and so I have to like, and this is also why I write books down,
Yeah.
because I go through the notes and I'm meticulous. And I also don't forget things. My mom has a photographic memory. I got it in my mid to late 20s when I stopped drinking. And ever since then, I remember almost everything I read. And so I'll remember all the details that I'll be able to ask Elaine, and Elaine's like a library.
Yeah.
And now that I talk to like a whole like a whole amazing host of people about these ideas, I can remember what the other person said. And so I like bounce off the questions and ideas and answers off of each of them. And I'm just getting so much more information, and it's getting deeper and deeper. So so I really love that. And I think that it's created something that is an open door. I mean, Chris Trump, the way he described it, I think is best, is that this opens a door that allows you to walk through. Because I was able to showcase my understanding of nature in a clear enough way to remove myself, hopefully for the most part.
Oh,
You never know, you know what I mean, right? We always have influence over the works we create, but this was the first work where I really felt like I was able to more objectively be the picture frame than like a narrator on a journey or something where I'm like coloring it. And so people read this book and then they have realizations, because those cycles, that's nature. Because those corrosion charts, that's chemistry, it's reality, right?
yep.
And so you can't kind of get past those things. They're like truths, and it has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And so what's so cool about it is that it allows people to have independent insights of what I've written, of of my experience, and it's just facilitative of that deeper comprehension. And and I use it. I mean, like I literally, this book, you know, I don't know if you can tell from the spine, but
It's a
like this
resource.
book, yeah, I use this every day, all the time. And you
Yeah.
know, like I add in little notes like this, like that this is the reason why EM actually brings energy, because amino acids are amphoteric. They can give or accept a proton. So when we say like, oh, when we add amino acids, they're not just like giving a building block, they're giving energy. You know, it's like, well, it's not like that. They can accept energy so they can balance the plant out, regardless of where it is energetically. So
Yeah.
that's why another reason why EM is so important. And and you can infer that, but I just wanted to like add that little note there. But yeah, so I'm in love with the information because it's enhancing everything I do. Um, just like the food I eat. I mean, It's like when you learn that vitamin C is basically very similar molecularly to sugar, and that's why sugar pushes out the vitamin C from our body. And the only vitamin C that we get is from our food. Right? And it's a critical antioxidant. And so yeah, and so just those kinds of things, those deep, like just pure realizations that you can't get past once you know them. It's been a journey, and yeah, it
Did you
continues to prove itself out.
now? I get the impression that you almost wrote it or put it together, I should say, as more of like a curriculum type of a book. I mean, when I'm looking through it, I get the feeling that it's like, man, this could be like a regenerative soil 101 type of a class because it covers such a diverse array. I mean, all the techniques are in there, the KNF, from that to Dr. Elaine's work to, advancing eco agriculture, John Kemp's work to Olivier. So I just kind of got the feeling that you were writing it almost like it was, or putting it together almost like it was going to be a class, like it was a book.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. My whole all right. So originally, I was a science fiction writer and a musician in New York City, and I failed. Well, no, I didn't fail at music. I ended up being a touring artist, and I quit at the height of my career. But because my wife was getting cancer repeatedly, and I had to be home. Um, that derailed me. What were we talking about again?
Well, just the book being written for a class there. You're
Yeah, I became a teacher out of necessity because my wife needed me home, and so
okay.
I stopped teaching. And I wrote curriculum at a school that only had MacBooks. There was no books, and I was an English teacher. And so I started, and I was a really prolific writer. And when I was in college, I wrote like 3 books. Um, and so that's couch that in this.
Yeah.
I wrote individual curriculums essentially for 150 different kids.
Cool.
And I proved that you don't need homework to get high standardized scores, and you don't need to teach to the test.
Huh.
I proved that through authentic learning that kids like learn way more than the intended objectives of the lesson. Like I did all this stuff. I was teaching teachers how to get off homework and essentially do their job. I was a little bit harsh, I admit, to other teachers. Forgive me, but the reality is, if you can't do your job in the 45 minutes that's allotted to you, then why would you push it onto the social life of the family and strain this kid's home life and take up his free time? You know what I mean? And then have the parents be the teachers and like it's just a mess. And the reality is if we had authentic teaching in schools connected to what they already know and value as a scaffolding to get to a higher level, we would get so much buy-in, self-teaching, and retention that we wouldn't be doing the same thing over and over and over again for so many years, as we all remember that we did.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, I became a teacher, and you can probably tell I'm a little obsessive about teaching. My mom created the special ed curriculum in New York State for middle schoolers in the 70s. There was nothing. They kept them all in a room in the basement away from the other kids. And my mom thought that was unacceptable. When I became a public school teacher, I saw that they were teaching nothing to kids. They were, it's straight up abusive. Like to hold people in a place and to not educate them on purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of words I could use, right? But it sounds evil to me. I mean, like, it's just like, I want to like rip the doors off. You know what I mean? Like, we can't do this to our children. And so I was like, I needed to figure out a way to liberate these kids. I'm teaching the 6th most violent county in America. I needed to figure this out. And so I started making curriculums that empowered them, that gave them options, that got them to get the skills in school before they left me. And so I started teaching kids how to do business plans and Kickstarters because I want them to start their own business now, get money now, let's go. You know what I mean? We're living in a depressed area. Let's fix this. Whew, sorry. This was
No,
like,
it's
this is
awesome,
still
dude. I
like
love it.
the inside thing, right? So I was a little bit less enthusiastic, a little bit more like savage in those days, my son tells me. And that was because I was like defending my kids. And my kid, like I've lost kids. You know what I mean? They've already died.
Wow.
And then most of my kids are in college age right now. Some of them have kids too now. And so I got really good at doing curriculum because it came from my heart. I cared about these kids. It came from a place of concern. Started writing curriculum like crazy. And then on the side of things, I was trying to figure out how to stop the cancer from coming back. I did the Gerson therapy for almost 2 years. I went almost crazy doing the 8 juices a day and cleaning everything and everything. My wife actually had to tell me, like, you no longer are helping me. Your stress level's stressing me out. Just stop. And so I like burned out in trying to help her. And so I realized I couldn't pay for the organic carrots to do the juices, let alone all the other stuff. And so I was like, I had to grow this stuff. And then I also visited a farm at that time that we were buying from that was organic, and their soil was so bad that it curdled my stomach. And I was like, oh, Matt, you thought you were like there's no way that this food is like better than anything you grow. And I was like, ah, it like hurt. And so I learned permaculture out of that experience. And it was what improved my soils, what launched me into a completely new stage in my life, allowed me to be positive about the future. I mean, I was savage for multiple reasons. I was savage because I had to protect and save my wife, protect my kids from all these unknowns. I had no idea what to do, what to think, who to trust. I mean, even today, medically, like I have like PTSD to a degree. I don't trust doctors. And like the last time my wife got like real bad cancer, she's had other forms of cancer afterwards, but she had like bone cancer. It's like I work with teams of doctors, and so like I work with doctors and everything, but I have this gut reaction. So like I was, I was at 9/11 and at NYU when I was a kid. I have a gut reaction, like being in cities and crowds now. I'm like, I feel less safe.
Yeah.
And it's, it's just my gut reaction. And so I respond to all these things by doing an enormous amount of studying and work. And so, like, I was a third born boy in a family of 4 boys. Both my older brothers were Olympic, like junior Olympic athletes. My brother played college football. My other brother was uh, a Division I ski racer, like, used to be Bodie Miller. And so, like, I never had anything like that. I was always the slowest, like in the group of future Olympians, keep in mind. So my perspective was all jacked up.
Yeah.
And so like I only knew how to survive by working like way harder than everyone else because everyone was naturally talented around me growing up. I went to a special boarding school. My roommates, went to the Olympics a few years ago and like blah blah blah. They're all like superhuman, and they were just hoping that me, the runt, would do something. And like my dad like probably heard if he heard that. He's like, son, but you made it to finals, and it's like, yeah, but my perspective at that time was that the only way to get ahead was to like outwork everyone. So that's what I've done. And so I just, that's why I've written over 20 books in the past 6 years,
Wow.
because that's how I respond to stress. I
Okay.
respond to stress by working harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
um, and I've reprogrammed my brain to like that and to get enthusiastic about challenge because I've had to. I
Yeah.
was a very depressed like angry person, not angry, more frustrated. So a lot of different things in life growing up, but it was permaculture mellowed me out, the gardening that mellowed me out, and then finding solutions and answers. And so I got all that led to me becoming this teacher and activating all this past epigenetic switches from my mom, who was an educator. They taught her herself, because what she did got adopted into law, and then at Columbia University, they taught herself to her. And she was like, I think I could create laws. And then she went on to be a politician. So I created this curriculum because, and this is just my latest thing, but I keep creating the curriculum that's the bridge between our world now and the future. And the reality is our education system informs our workplace, and it creates the workers that go out, or the entrepreneurs, ideally, right? And that's why I was teaching Kickstarters. That's why I was teaching business startup. And I still do in the context of the regenerative economy and permaculture. And I know there's some knee-jerk reactions out there like, permaculture, everything should be free and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, we should empower people to be regenerative and create their own yields and abundance, just like they do in the soil food web, right? In the soil, in the rhizosphere. And so I write everything in terms of curriculum. And I wrote this in alignment to the next generation science standards and the national science education standards. So this actually could be taught in high schools.
That's
I
awesome.
know it's really advanced.
No,
And
that's
it's probably
super
a
awesome.
little bit too advanced for most high schools. But I have seen incredible comprehension rates from high schoolers in that high school that's supposedly in this really depressed area. I'm bringing NYU top 40, university information, and they get it. I mean, obviously, like if I say it's IRA poetry, like terrorist poetry from Ireland, to these kids that are totally checked out, these like junior boys, they're gonna be like, wait, what did you just say? There's poetry? And then they're suddenly interested.
Yeah.
Right. And so like we got to reach people where they're at and everything, and also show them their power. And so I really got into that. And Jeff Lawton, I took his PDC. I asked permission I don't have them out. I've already packed them for the move, but the permaculture student won, and I turned it into a curriculum, and I did a Kickstarter, and in 3 days it was fully funded. And in 30 days, I had made as much money as I make in an entire year as a teacher.
Wow.
And I realized I could quit my job. And then I felt like really guilty. And I'm like, should I quit my job? Am I abandoning my kids? And I realized that this is wild. You have the opportunity to, outside the classroom, influence classrooms. And it's super creative. I always wanted to be a writer. I felt like I was a failed writer and I'd given up. And people wanted it. And so I was like, this is incredible. And in fact, the standards for this were the same standards I linked for the purple book, the Permaculture Student 2, which is free. It's over 400 pages. It's peer reviewed. It's the first peer reviewed and cited textbook ever in permaculture.
That's cool.
It's the first cited since Bill Mollison's in '89. And I know like you'll find permaculture textbooks that reference other permaculture textbooks. Those aren't citations really. Gardeners referencing other gardening books doesn't lead us to anywhere like scientific literature or journals. And so that's what I did. And I had to rewrite a bunch of things that Bill Mollison was based on 70s and 80s information, which is it's logical.
Yeah.
It upset some people because he was like the Bible to them. But I linked it to the standards when I did it. And because I did that, schools were able to use it. And because I did that, educators were able to push it through and get it accredited. I didn't do it. It was accredited independently of me. So that's like what I do now is I write, I create books, I align them properly, and I create teachers' guides so that, and I mean, when I was a teacher, I was of the opinion that it was like just shameful if you weren't an expert in that subject, because how could you speak from experience? And but we are in a late hour and of great need, and so I designed the textbooks, the teachers editions, to literally be like the regular public school books, where they don't need to know the subject matter. They can learn with the students as they go through it, and have it be a great experience even that way, because it's too late. Like I can't like be like, no, 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 you all need advanced PDCs before you can teach it in school. Like, no, there's no time.
Yeah.
It's like I need to give you the tools and just give you the shovel and just point you, shovel there, and then next shovel here. And you know what I mean?
Yep.
And as you do it, I'll explain it and you'll know forever, because we're doing it together. And
Yeah.
and we'll get there all together. We'll make it happen. But it was really critical that I kind of got over that limitation that I had, because I was, I was very hard on other teachers, and and yeah, we're just in a situation where, the people who are there out of the goodness of their hearts, because the people that were there that were experienced and could leave, left for the most part in academia. So yeah, bless them for being there, and let's give them the tools to dig our kids out, is how I see it.
No, I agree, man. I definitely I appreciate your passion for that too, because that's I mean it shows through. It definitely does. I hate feeling like I'm promoting the book, but I've been blown away by it as such a resource for one, and I think
Thanks.
the accumulation of knowledge that's in the one piece is like the price of it is honestly it's like a no brainer to me. I mean that's why I've been kind of recommending. There's a few people in chat that have already purchased it too, and I honestly believe it's going to be like up in the top 5 of the books as far as resource books on building soil and whatnot. So very well done on that too, man. So
Thank you. I
yeah,
was nervous when I named it regenerative soil, because that's a big statement.
yeah,
And I was like, Matt, you're gonna take this title, because it's like, if you don't take it, someone else will. And I was like, if you're gonna take this, you got to do the right thing. You got to make sure you get to the end zone. You know what I mean? You got to make it. You got
yeah,
to reach. And so that's why it took longer than I anticipated, and that's why I learned to illustrate. As a kid, I drew, but this is the first book that I illustrated
that's
out of
cool.
all my books.
So you drew
Yeah,
all
and so I did. I
awesome.
drew all those drawings because I couldn't pay someone to do the amount of drafts that this needed. This
Okay.
needed so many drafts. And I mean, I would bring these to experts and they'd be like, whoa, hey, there's this thing that, and they would just add something and I'd be like, okay, what would that look like? You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I could never pay anyone, because, okay, I love artists, but it's very difficult to pay. And I loved paying like other artists and illustrators. I loved doing that. But when it's scientific level, we have to constantly be like revising. And I was having to pay $50 a revision on drawings every time. And so I realized at the very beginning of this process that there was no way that I could ever afford it. I would blow through the money on just the art without ever like being able to print. Um, so yeah, it completely transformed me. And I mean, it's my 2020. I think that's a part of it too, is that like I hunkered down, and this was like the therapy. This was like what I focused on. I'm like, oh, there's news on. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
exactly.
I hid from the world and just immersed myself into the world of microbes, because it was beautiful and there was lessons to be learned, and it's the most fascinating. I know space is cool. People love space. It's all nice and spread out. The bee's knees is downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible down there. And so yeah, I am just enamored with that space.
I agree, man. And I've only, I have a cheap microscope. I've looked a few times myself, but yeah, it's totally a different world, and it's pretty amazing. Really, a lot of it is. So,
Have you seen the 3D, the new 3D microscope images that they're coming up with?
have not.
There's this channel called Seeker. That's a good science channel. They're not like perfect. None of these science channels are, right? Because they don't have like an ethical like compass. But the 3D microscope episode is absolutely stunning because they're videoing these things moving in 3D space, and we've always been smashing them on these slides into these basically two-dimensional realities, and then we've been blasting them with light, and they're soil microbes, so we're
Right.
cooking them. We're UV like frying them, and then we're trying to say like this is their behavior.
Gotcha.
So there's also um, like dark microscopy where it's like backlit, like black backlit, and so you see colors in different ways and different textures. And then there's the stains. So and we all don't have those readily like in usage everywhere. I mean, it's like one person has that microscope and the one person is the stain person, and then you know what I mean? It's all still spread out, and that's something that I'm really interested in, is kind of bringing that all in together so that we can. I mean, there's the soil microbe library from Keisha. She's working on that, but having like video reels of these things and be, because they literally are like ranching microbes and stuff. The behaviors are like predator prey and the way they move, and it it's really incredible. And I think once we get it's about both the technology and the availability, and I think that once we get databases out there that allow us all to like kind of like watch 20 hours of
Yeah.
this stuff with it ID'd. Because if we could just sit there and then watch ID'd footage for a while and get our eye adjusted and our pattern literacy up, all of us are going to be able to see this stuff and
Yeah.
understand it at a completely different level. And so, again, I think we're pretty close. And I think that because it's we haven't trained any AI to eyeball these things, and I don't think we're going to for a while. We're going to be doing the meter and then better scopes, um, and maybe AI assisted scopes even,
Hmm. That's
because
interesting.
they would identify things and then we would look at it and then we would run through like because I mean there's so much of this stuff is potential and possibility that you have to like triangulate to get through it.
Yeah, I understand. I like the way you put that too. That is potential or possibility, because a lot of times everybody's like, "Oh, we got nitrogen fixing. We got these azos we're gonna add in there, so we got the nitrogen all covered." But it's not exactly like that. It is. It's so dynamic. It's interesting, the depth of it. How everything interplays.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, I guess one kind of input that I guess I don't know, but biochar is a section in there, and I'm curious what you think what you would consider the best practices or uses um, with the biochar in your soil.
Yes, this is a great question. So recently I visited Josiah Hunt of Pacific Biochar, and he's been running experiments. And so Mike Amaranthus will say 5% of the soil, mixed medium, is what he would say is like above that, there's no benefit. Quantumacvia would say like 10 to 15% is cool. Josiah is doing things with like 80%.
Oh, wow.
Char just to see what happens. And the roots go through everything and they look just the same. I would say if anything, the roots seemed a little bit more uniformly dense in the biochar rich one, which is pretty crazy. So we don't really know what the limits are for biochar, especially if it's inoculated biochar, if it's already stabilized and it's not going to have like a tipping effect or a stealing or a locking up effect as it goes in. Biochar holds 3 times its mass in water. That's particularly why you want to be careful with it in certain operations. Some people would be overwatering and then their cannabis would be having trouble in like Oregon, for instance, with too much biochar. So I think start at 5% and wiggle, upward from there, because I've got, two cultivators saying 5% is good, but then I also have, a biochar, creator doing really dramatic things with biochar. And he's also using, I should say what he's using. So he's using forest floor fuel biomass. So it's not like wood chips. So it's got younger material. It's got smaller, like diameter material. So that's all going to be higher in sugars. That's all going to be higher in nitrogen. It's going to be different than the just straight up wood chips. So that's important. But I would say that the best practice with biochar is to use it as a biology and rock dust inoculum carrier. And so you would take your char and you if it wasn't already the right fraction size, you'd break it down to the right fraction size. And then you would, maybe water an EM, compost tea. And then you could be, sprinkling your rock dust over that as you're like turning it so that it's like evenly mixed in. And that biochar is going to hold those things really, really well. And so that's really a great practice for adding biochar. It's going to be able to retain those nutrients and the microbes really well because they're just essentially like magnets. Because we stripped off all their organic compounds, we've stripped everything off. So they're going to be like, I need stuff to make me complete. And so they're just going to attract it all.
That's a good way to look at it too, that we stripped everything off. So it's that bear. It's got its agenda in the soil there. Everything's got its agenda.
Right.
So, hey, man, we're coming up on a couple hours. I just want to check in, see how you're doing and time wise on things.
I probably should run. I usually go to bed at 10. So
Okay.
it's a little late for me.
No, I understand, man. I definitely have appreciated the conversation. I appreciate your time and I've really been enjoying the book too. So it's awesome that it's set up in a way that it's easy to grasp and easy to learn. So I appreciate that very much. We've mentioned it several times, but why don't you shout out where the best spot would be for anybody listening that's interested? I highly recommend it. It's just because it's a great resource, but where would they find that?
It's on Amazon, and we hit like number 3 in soil science last month, which was wild.
Congratulations.
Right below Gabe Brown, but you could also get it from me directly.
Okay.
And I'll get it to you on sale, and free shipping and signed. So You can get that at thepermaculturestudent.com, and you just click on books, and it's right there under Matt's books.
And
First one on top.
you had a course on a 12-day course or something, and they can find info on that on your website as well there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a 30-hour introduction to regenerative soil. I've got permaculture courses, of course. But yeah, I've got like 10 online courses. I did the introduction for this, and that's complete and self-paced that you can hop into. But I'm currently filming and recording and visiting commercial farms and soil consultants and compost makers for a much larger course, regenerative soil, the in-depth 16-week course.
Nice.
It's gonna be a lot of fun. I get to follow around consultants to vineyards and almond orchards, and to get to see how the industries are all shifting. I mean, it started with cannabis, with the rigorous testing that you all have done. It's opened the door. It's legitimized so much of the best aspects, the verifiable aspects of organic, and now we're seeing compost. We're seeing this understanding spread to all the other, I would say, higher end or performance rated kind of foods, like wines are like really like about that experience and the smell, and you know what I mean. It's like a performance, right? Just like cannabis is, but we're breaking into almonds, and I know that people are obviously using like compost and vegetable growing, but they're not at that level yet that like cannabis is at. And it's going to change everything when it does. It really is.
That's awesome to think. Yeah, man. And you got what's your YouTube channel too? That's the permaculture student as well, is it?
Yeah, it's my name, Matt Powers, the permaculture student.
Okay, cool. Because there, I know, I'm just gonna say this for out there too. Olivia, he did a really great conversation with Olivia Husan that came out a couple days ago. I was watching that today too, so that was awesome, man. Great info in there too. And Olivia is a great guy. I really enjoy listening to him talk about that stuff. So that was cool.
Yeah, his enthusiasm's great.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, man, I'll let you sign out. I'm gonna close out the episode, and I definitely appreciate the time you spent with me here too. So, and I know a lot of people in the chat. I don't know how many we got. There's 77 watching right now. So
thank you all for watching.
Definitely, man. So best of wishes, man. I appreciate it.
You too. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too, man. So,
and thank you.
Yeah, so I hope everybody out there in chat enjoyed this one, and definitely we'll have a wormhole afterwards popping up. So hope everybody got something in their notes and learned something from it, or could take something away from it.